Hi, I'm Andalyn. At that dinner table, surrounded by polished silverware, forced smiles, and fake laughter, my father raised his glass and said I'd never be good enough. My sister laughed, my mother didn't blink, and every guest pretended not to hear. But then, his boss walked in, and when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your Honor," everything cracked. The question is, was that the moment I won, or just the moment they lost everything? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been underestimated by your own blood? Let me tell you what came next. The envelope came on a Wednesday. Heavy ivory stock, gold foil trim, the kind of thing my mother thought screamed class. It sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I even touched it. I already knew what it was. A family legacy celebration, the card read. An intimate dinner to honor the Blake family name and its generational contributions to New Jersey's civic progress. Translation: my father inviting old friends to gloat about his golden children. I wasn't one of them, not in his eyes, not in hers either. I almost threw it out. But after a night of tossing in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it churned the same tired air, I found myself pulling the invitation from the trash, smoothing its crease like it hadn't almost ended up covered in coffee grounds. I wasn't going for them. I wasn't going to smile for Eloise's curated Instagram album or pose next to Grant and Felice like we were something we'd never been. Close. I was going for myself. Maybe for the final time. Closure doesn't knock twice. I drove up the long, familiar road in silence, trees on either side bare-limbed and gray against the March sky. The estate had barely changed. The same stone lions guarded the circular driveway, the same hedges trimmed like military cadets, and the same coldness pulsed in my chest the minute I stepped out of the car. The door opened before I knocked. "Miss Andalyn," the maid said. Her name was Alma, I remembered that, then stepped aside without a smile. Inside, the hallway was a showroom. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, trays of champagne floated from gloved hands, and not a single soul turned to greet me. I spotted my sister's voice before her face, laughing about some gala in D.C. where her husband had apparently shared a whiskey with the governor. I stood quietly for a moment, coat still on, waiting to see if anyone noticed. They didn't. At the table, names were printed in delicate cursive on cream cards. I scanned them. Grant, Felice, Mother, Father, Senator Lowell. But no Andalyn. Alma appeared at my side again, this time holding a cloth napkin. Not white like the others, not embroidered with the family crest either, just a flat, limp, gray square. "I believe this is yours," she said, placing it gently on the chair where no card waited. Her tone was neutral, but something in her eyes flickered. Sympathy, maybe. Or memory. I sat. I smoothed the napkin across my lap without a word, pressing the corners down slowly. It didn't need to be said. It never had. My mother had spent decades perfecting this kind of exclusion, just enough to be deniable, never enough to confront. But it added up, like mold behind wallpaper. Felice's voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Oh, Andy, you made it after all." She gave a smile that never reached her eyes. "You still in New York?" "D.C.," I replied. "For the last 4 years." "Oh, right. She nodded vaguely, already turning back to her husband. "Elliot just got appointed to the Ethics Oversight Committee. You should have seen the crowd at the announcement. Cameras everywhere. He gave such a powerful speech." Grant chuckled, tipping his glass toward her. "Must be nice to have a real job." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it stung like slap water. I didn't say a word. I reached for my water instead, the edge of the gray napkin catching my wrist like it knew what was coming. "So," a woman in a red dress said, smiling at me, "what do you do, Andalyn?" I opened my mouth, but before a syllable formed, my mother cut in, tone breezy. "She's always been very private. Something with law things." The woman blinked. "Law things?" "Exactly." My mother beamed, as if that settled it. "We've always supported our children's choices." I watched her fingers wrap elegantly around her wine glass, her ring catching the chandelier light. the same hand that used to pull me back behind her in public whenever someone asked if I was adopted. There was a scrape of silver on china as the staff began to serve the next course. Felice leaned in to Elliot, whispering something I didn't catch, but I caught the way his eyes flicked toward me and how quickly he looked away. Grant poured himself more wine, half sloshing it. "You'll always be beneath us, Dee," he snorted, "even if you wear those fancy black suits now." No one corrected him. No one said a word. The table just laughed, not the deep belly kind, no. This was a sharp, cultured cackle. The kind of laugh people use when they know they can get away with it. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I just pressed the edges of the napkin into my thighs and kept breathing. Quiet, invisible. Like always. A toast began. My father stood, glass in hand, and cleared his throat. "To family," he started. "To legacy. To children who make us proud and carry our name with—" But then it happened. The door to the dining room opened, sudden and deliberate. A young staff member rushed in, cheeks flushed. "Apologies for the interruption. Judge Malcolm has just arrived." The entire table stilled. My father lowered his glass mid-sentence. My mother blinked twice, then turned toward the door. Grant muttered, "He wasn't supposed to come till dessert." But I didn't move, didn't look, because I already knew. Behind me, footsteps approached, and then, calm and clear, a voice spoke, not to my father, not to the room, but directly to me. "Your Honor, thank you for waiting." The moment Judge Malcolm stepped through the double doors, something in the air shifted, like the first break in a thunderstorm when everything stills. He scanned the table once, then looked directly past my father, past the guests, past the hand-stitched centerpiece Felice had ordered from a boutique in Manhattan. "Your Honor," he said with quiet authority, "thank you for waiting." My father's jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his molars click. Silverware stilled. Someone dropped a spoon. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. Malcolm approached with a calm grace that only men in his position could master, men used to rooms falling quiet when they entered. He made no pretense of greeting anyone else, no glance at my father, not even a nod to the man whose night this was supposedly about. Instead, he stopped at my side. "My apologies, Judge Park. There was a delay leaving chambers." My mother blinked so fast I thought she was having a reaction to the lighting. "Wait, you know our daughter?" she asked, like the idea was both foreign and mildly embarrassing. Judge Malcolm offered her a polite smile. "Know her? Ma'am, your daughter authored one of the most exacting judicial decisions in the Wilkins federal case last year. It set a national precedent. Frankly, some of us are still playing catch-up." I heard Grant let out a low, awkward chuckle from across the table. "Wilkins? Wasn't that the case with all the corporate tax fraud?" Felice didn't speak. She just stared into her glass of Pinot Noir, swirling it gently like she might find a better version of this evening in the bottom. Malcolm didn't wait for them to respond. "I'd like her seated here," he said firmly, gesturing to the empty seat next to him at the head of the table. "It's where she belongs." Before anyone could argue, one of the catering staff returned quietly, pushing in an extra chair with the same upholstered brocade as the others. She offered a subtle nod in my direction. Then, just as softly, someone else came behind her and replaced the gray napkin in front of me with a white embroidered one like everyone else had. The monogram shimmered faintly in the chandelier light. I stared at it for a moment, then, without a word, I folded it neatly and placed it on the table beside my plate, leaving the original gray one on my lap. That one I kept. My father hadn't spoken, but I could see the veins in his neck tightening. A slight sheen of sweat had formed just above his brow. He picked up his glass only to realize his hand was trembling slightly. He set it back down. Felice finally found her voice, a thin whisper. "Andolyn, since when are you a judge?" I turned slightly, meeting her eyes with a calm she didn't expect. "For 3 years now." Grant gave a short laugh. Wait, like a real federal judge? Like with a courtroom and a gavel and all that?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. She's a United States District Judge, Mr. Park. She presides over constitutional and federal law. Yes, that includes gavels. No one at the table dared laugh again. My mother's lips parted slightly like she was trying to search for a memory she'd conveniently discarded. But I thought you were still in what, Mother? I asked quietly, not unkindly. Still in law school? Still trying to find myself? Still too quiet for courtrooms? I let the silence answer for her. The servers brought out dessert just then, something elaborate and overly sweet. The clink of china and silver broke the stillness only slightly, like a thin layer of noise spread over something much heavier beneath. Malcolm took a slow sip of his coffee. Then, casually, almost as if the thought had just occurred to him, he turned to my father. "Oh, Gerald," he said, "I nearly forgot. Your promotion proposal? Refresh my memory. Isn't it your daughter or your son who sits on the ethics review board this year?" The entire room stilled again. My father's face went pale. His lips parted, but nothing came out for a beat too long. Then, barely above a whisper, he stammered, I believe it's under review." "No," I said softly, slicing into the dessert with my fork. "You were right the first time. It's me." I didn't even glance up. I just let the words settle, because this time I didn't need to raise my voice. The tines of my fork slid through the delicate layer of the vanilla sponge as if nothing had shifted, but inside, everything had. I could feel it, like a tremor beneath polished marble. Across the table, Felice whispered something sharp into Grant's ear. His jaw clenched, Father's hands twitched against the tablecloth, his wine untouched. Gerald was still recovering from Judge Malcolm's final question about the ethics review board. I took a breath and smiled, not at anyone in particular. Then I slowly rose from my seat. "Excuse me," I said, placing my napkin gently on the table. "Just stepping out for some air." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. The quiet was enough. The hush said more than any apology ever could. The hallway outside the dining room was dimly lit, lined with tall windows looking out over the courtyard. Rain tapped gently against the glass, like a patient knock from the sky. I walked toward the far end, where the light faded into a corner near the back veranda. My fingers were calm, loosely clasped behind me, but truth be told, they trembled slightly. I let them. No one could see out here. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. 5 years ago, I was standing in a different hallway. This same estate, in fact. It was just before my final interview for a federal clerkship. I'd gone to the family safe to retrieve the letter of recommendation from my mentor, Judge Kendrick, a letter I'd worked hard for. But the envelope was gone. Felice had come up behind me with that rehearsed innocence she wore so well. "Did you misplace it?" she asked, her tone syrupy, her smile just a little too wide. Mother appeared not long after. "Maybe it's a sign," she'd said, straightening the hem of her blazer like this was just another Tuesday. "You've always been sensitive, Andolyn. Maybe this path isn't for you." Sensitive. That word stung more than I let on at the time. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I packed my files, drove straight to Judge Kendrick's home, and knocked on his door myself. He opened it in slippers and a Yale sweatshirt. I explained what had happened, without naming names. He didn't ask. He saw it in my eyes. He signed a new copy of the letter that night. I rewrote my personal statement by dawn, mailed the new packet at 7:15 a.m., and got the call 2 weeks later. I'd earned the spot. On merit, on resilience, without a single handout from anyone in this family. I opened my eyes again, letting the memory settle like rain in the soil. Behind me, I heard slow footsteps. I turned. Father. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not in shame, but in unease, like someone not used to having the weaker hand. "We didn't know," he said. His voice was gravelly, not from age, but from avoidance. All those years of not asking, not looking too closely. I met his eyes, steady. "No," I replied. "You didn't." Then I turned and walked past him. He didn't follow. Back in the corridor leading toward the dining room, Felice was waiting. Leaning against the wall, arms folded, her wine glass was gone, her eyes sharp. "Why now?" she asked. "Why tonight?" I paused mid-step. "I didn't plan this, Felice." She narrowed her gaze. "Don't play coy. You wanted this—" I cut her off gently. "You planned your lies poorly. That's not on me." Her lips parted, but no words came out. I gave her a polite nod, then walked on, heels clicking softly against the stone tiles. Just before I reached the threshold of the dining room again, one of Judge Malcolm's aides approached quietly. A younger man in a tailored gray suit, glasses perched low on his nose. "Your Honor," he said in a low tone, "just wanted to let you know, I passed along your name to Senator Holland. They'd like to meet you before the Judiciary Committee hearing next month." I nodded, heart steady. "Thank you." He smiled and disappeared down the hallway. I turned back toward the dining room, peering through the glass panel. Inside, the room had shifted. My family sat smaller now, less certain, less loud, their shoulders tense, their plates barely touched. Felice hadn't returned to her seat. The white linen on the table, the flickering candles, the quiet clinking of cutlery, all of it felt distant, almost staged. And that was the moment I realized, this wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. The murmur of jazz filtered through the old speaker system as I stepped back into the dining hall. A few guests had shifted to the parlor nearby, drinks in hand, making polite conversation under dim chandeliers that hadn't been dusted properly in years. The room smelled faintly of burnt sugar and ambition. Malcolm had returned to his place at the far end of the table. He waited until I was near enough to hear, then stood with the ease of a man who knew exactly what weight his words carried. "This woman," he said, lifting his glass, "is the future of justice in this state. Possibly beyond." A gentle clink of silverware and murmured surprise fluttered through the room. A few guests clapped. The dean of my old law school nodded. One of the older judges let out a quiet, "Well, I'll be damned." My parents didn't move. My mother blinked, her hands locked tightly around the stem of her wine glass. Grant gave 2 slow, begrudging claps. Felice stared at her plate like it held the answers to a test she hadn't studied for. I didn't smile. I simply nodded in gratitude, keeping my gaze fixed somewhere between Malcolm's shoulder and the old fireplace behind him. Then Eloise stood. Her voice came soft at first, then with the carefully cultivated poise of someone used to charming social circles where facts were optional. "We always knew she'd do something special," she said, angling herself slightly to face the crowd more than me. "Andolin's always been so independent." That word. Independent. Not brilliant, not determined, not capable, just left alone, forgotten. Used to carrying weight no one helped lift. Inside, something flared. A slow, quiet flame. Not rage. Rage was too easy. This was precision, the kind of heat that cooks slowly but never burns out. "She was always destined for greatness," Eloise continued, her voice taking on the rehearsed brightness she used at charity fundraisers. "Just like her brother and sister. Honestly, they've all made us proud." And just like that, she pulled me back into the same sentence as the 2 people who'd once tried to have me removed from the family trust. The same sentence, because that's how control works in our family. You're either erased or absorbed, no in between. A few guests clapped politely. Others glanced at each other, the way people do when something doesn't sit quite right, but no one wants to be the first to name it. Malcolm didn't clap. Instead, he leaned slightly toward me, his voice barely above the hum of the room. "No need to perform," he said, eyes steady. "You've already earned your standing." And just like that, I remembered who I was, not to them, but to myself. I picked up my glass, stood, and waited until the clinking died down. "To the truth," I said, voice even. "It tends to arrive late, but always on time." A silence fell, not awkward, not dramatic, just solid, a beat that couldn't be filled with small talk or spin. My father cleared his throat. My mother looked away, and not a single person challenged the toast. I sat down slowly. One of the aides brought over a fresh drink, her eyes glancing briefly toward the table where Felice had grown stiff. No one said another word about the toast, because what could they say? A few minutes later, guests began to rise. Plates scraped gently against bone china. Coats were pulled from the antique rack in the corner. The room loosened, conversation tipping back toward politics and summer travel plans. I stood near the side of the parlor, watching it unfold. One guest's daughter, a young woman in her early 20s with bright eyes and a tight braid, walked up to me with a glass of sparkling water in hand. "Excuse me," she said, a little breathless. "Are you Andalyn Maris? Like the Judge Maris from the Simmons ruling?" I nodded. Her face lit up. "I read your opinion 3 times during my senior year. It changed everything for me. I'm applying to law school because of that case." I didn't say much, just a quiet thank you. But something in my chest warmed, not pride, but peace. Real peace. Not the kind my family claims lives under silence and obedience, but the kind that comes when someone sees your work, not your role, not your family name, but the weight you carried to get here. The young woman left. I watched her walk back toward her father, a state representative who nodded at me as she whispered something in his ear. Then my mother's voice broke in. "The Simmons case?" she asked behind me, just loud enough to draw attention. I turned. Her face looked almost innocent, performatively confused. "What's the Simmons case?" And for the first time in my life, I didn't answer. I didn't explain, didn't shrink, didn't offer context to soften her confusion or protect her image. I just looked her straight in the eyes and left her standing in the silence she'd built around me for decades. I left her question hanging in the air, sharp, half mocking, half curious, and turned away. I didn't owe her an answer, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to give one. That night, I didn't sleep much. Even after all these years, their voices still echoed, sometimes louder in silence than they ever did in real life. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring out the window. The thick velvet curtains did nothing to block out the sliver of moonlight slicing through the sky. The night had been suffocating, all murmurs and masks and controlled applause. But morning came anyway. I woke before the sun crested the hills. The estate was still, too still, like the whole house was holding its breath. I padded down the hall barefoot. No creaks underfoot, no voices, no movement, just that deep, empty quiet only these old houses know, the kind where even your heartbeat feels too loud. The kitchen was dim and cool. I didn't bother turning on the light. I knew every inch of it by heart. The same chipped mug still sat in the back of the cabinet, blue, with faded gold trim. I used to sneak cocoa in it as a kid, crouched beside the heater vent. I filled it with coffee, black, and stepped out onto the back patio. The fog was lifting slowly off the lawn, tendrils uncoiling like they'd been holding secrets all night. I found the old chair tucked in the corner, right by the potted rosemary bush. Worn wood, the arms smoothed down by years of hands and summers. I sat there often as a child, listening, waiting, wanting to be seen. It hadn't changed, but I had. The heat from the mug warmed my fingers. My breath clouded the morning air. And for a while, I let myself sit in the quiet. Not to numb it, but to feel everything the silence was saying. It took me back, to a different morning, 8 years ago. I stood under the archway of the law school auditorium, holding my cap in one hand and a folded program in the other. My name had just been called, loud, clear, echoing. But no one clapped. No familiar voices, no camera flashes, just the hum of strangers' cheers for their own. Other families stood outside on the lawn, laughing, hugging, juggling flower bouquets and oversized teddy bears with graduation caps, mothers wiping tears, fathers beaming with pride, siblings arguing over who got to post the first picture. I didn't even bring anyone. Felice couldn't get off work. My mother wasn't feeling well. My father hadn't bothered to respond. I was told, kindly and coldly, "You understand, right?" I did. I'd understood since I was 12 that being their daughter didn't mean being their priority, so I set up my tripod by the fountain, hit the remote shutter, and smiled into the lens like it didn't hurt. That night, after unzipping my gown and folding it into the suitcase, I found an envelope slipped under my door, and my throat tightened. It was from Judge Hamner. He'd mentored me during my third-year clerkship, stern, meticulous, brilliant, the kind of man who said more with his silences than with his speeches. Inside, there was no long letter, just a line, handwritten in blue ink. "You don't need an audience to be excellent." I sat on the edge of the bed and read that sentence over and over until the paper crinkled beneath my fingertips. I didn't know it then, but that sentence would become my spine. He became the man who vouched for me, who nominated me when no one else even thought to whisper my name. He didn't do it out of pity. He did it because he saw me. Not as someone's forgotten daughter, but as a mind, a voice, a force. And now, I was sitting on the patio of the house where I was never clapped for, never cheered for, never even acknowledged, until it became useful for their image. The back door creaked behind me. I didn't turn right away, but I heard the soft shuffle of slippers, the cough that always preceded his presence. My father. He was in his robe, wrinkled, hair still slightly matted on one side, not shaved. He looked smaller in the morning light. He sat in the chair next to mine, one cushion over, didn't say anything. Not at first. I let him sit. There was no need to break the silence quickly. Let him feel what I felt for years. After a while, he cleared his throat again. "We never thought it would be you," he said. His voice wasn't harsh, just confused, almost like he was still trying to do the math. I turned my eyes to the horizon. The fog had mostly lifted now. "That much was clear," I said quietly, but it never stopped me. He looked down at his hands. No apology, no excuses, just the kind of silence that comes when someone realizes too late that they missed something important. We sat there until the shadows shifted. I stood up first. Back inside, the dining room was still set from last night, the shine of polished silver and the echo of half-truths still clinging to the air. I placed a folder on the table. It wasn't thick, just a few pages, but weight isn't always measured in pounds. On the front, in bold, was a label. "For your ethics review. You'll want to read pages 3 through 6 carefully." I didn't linger. I walked to the door, my heels clicking softly against the marble, keys already in hand. And as I stepped outside into the sharp light of morning, something inside me felt different. Not lighter, but aligned. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the girl they forgot. I felt like the woman they'd underestimated, one document, one silence, one step at a time. I hadn't planned to come back, but they gave me a reason. The Tuesday after I left that envelope on the dining table, I was back in my office, sipping chamomile and reviewing case briefs when the pinging started. First my email, then my phone, then the landline. Nobody used the landline anymore. Something was happening. By the time I clicked the first link a colleague had sent, the video had already hit 30,000 views. Felice. Perfectly lit, seated on a crisp white sofa beside a faux bookshelf backdrop, one of those local legacy segments on regional TV. The chyron at the bottom read, "Big sister to DC's rising star judge, Felice Linwood opens up." I didn't even have time to blink before the host began gushing. "You must be so proud. What's it like seeing your little sister in the headlines?" Felice laughed softly. "She's always been ambitious. I used to help her with applications, walk her through interview questions. You know, family always comes first. Our parents really instilled that in us." She said that like I hadn't sat alone at graduation, like she hadn't changed her number for 2 years after that fight about our inheritance, like she hadn't once told me I wasn't media-friendly enough to be the face of anything public. Then they cut to photos. A family BBQ, where she'd cropped out her ex-husband and shoved herself closer to me. A childhood picture with both of us on swings, but she'd used the one where I was mid-blink, looking stunned, and then a scan of my original clerkship letter. But something was off. The signature. It wasn't Judge Hamner's. She'd edited it, or used an early draft, one I'd deleted. The entire segment played like a quiet performance. Polished lies wrapped in soft smiles and harmless phrases. Not a single word overtly cruel, just enough to rewrite the truth. By noon, 3 different reporters had emailed my clerkship office. One even left a voicemail asking if I could confirm how your sister assisted your judicial journey. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months, one I kept labeled, "If Ever Needed." It held receipts. Literal and metaphorical, every clipped email, every rerouted message, every time Felice had accidentally CC'd someone she shouldn't have, bad-mouthing me, including one where she asked a mutual friend to casually suggest I withdraw my name from a fellowship because it's just not a good fit for her image. That night, I didn't speak, I didn't tweet, I didn't text. I scheduled a call with the federal court's PR team. The week after, while Felice's words still floated through morning shows and hometown news feeds, the court released a quiet, bullet-pointed digital press kit. Just 5 PDFs. No headline, no commentary, but it spread like wildfire. My official clerkship offer letter, with Judge Hamner's handwritten note on the bottom. "You earned this all on your own, Andolyn. Be proud." An email chain where Felice had tried to reschedule my final interview by impersonating my assistant. It failed. The committee was confused. I showed up anyway. A string of text messages she'd sent an old professor of mine, claiming I was emotionally unstable and not ready for leadership, sent just 2 weeks before I was nominated. Screenshots didn't lie, not when watermarks and metadata backed them up. By Thursday, the hashtag #SheDidItAlone was trending. A former classmate of mine, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, shared a photo of us in our dusty law library cubicle. She used to carry 3 textbooks in one arm and a protein bar in the other. No one helped her. We all knew. Someone else posted, "Funny how the same folks who erased her story now want to be part of the retelling." Felice's Instagram vanished overnight. Her LinkedIn profile locked. By Friday, a mutual cousin from Michigan messaged me, "Girl, what happened? Uncle Frank is calling everybody. Your dad's been pacing the driveway." I ignored it, not out of cruelty, but because, for once, silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. Saturday morning, my father called. Twice. I let them ring, and then came Sunday. Marcy, my assistant, nearly knocked over her desk running into my office. "They want you in D.C., she panted, waving an email printout like it might combust. "Senator Holland's team, they want you on the ethics committee, not next year, like, this week." I blinked once, twice. Then I reached for my laptop and quietly closed it. I didn't pack right away. I had one more stop to make. And I knew exactly where to go before I set foot in D.C. It was nearly dusk when I turned off the main road and into the driveway I hadn't driven up in years. The estate looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown past the illusion of its grandeur. The lights were dim, only a couple glowing through the front windows, casting long amber streaks across the marble floor as I stepped inside. I let myself in. No one rushed to greet me. No startled gasps or calls of my name. The air inside was thick, still perfumed with expensive silence and disappointment. My heels echoed down the corridor as I walked toward the study. The door was open. My father sat at the far end of the long walnut table, glasses low on his nose, legal pads and folders strewn like a crime scene. He didn't even flinch when I walked in, just looked up, folded his hands and said, "They're coming after the company, and your mother. We need your help." "No, hello. No, thank you for coming." I stood there for a beat, letting the weight of his words hang. He gestured to a chair across from him like it was still his house, still his rules. I didn't sit. Instead, I rested my hand lightly on the edge of the table and asked, "Is this about the old charity filings?" He didn't answer. Didn't need to. The room was dim, the curtains drawn just enough to dull the last light. I could see the stress carved into his face, the documents trembling slightly in his aging hands. I remembered the first time this came up, 7 years ago. It was right after I passed the bar. I'd been offered a clerkship with a federal judge, and my father invited me for dinner, just the two of us, which was already strange. Halfway through the meal, he slid a sealed envelope across the table. "A harmless affidavit," he said, "just states that during the time of the donation drives, all reporting and grant allocations were properly filed and distributed." It wasn't harmless. I read every line that screamed misappropriation, fraud, intentional deception wrapped in polite language. I refused. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just stood and said, "I won't be used to clean up something I didn't spill." That was the first time I truly saw disappointment in his eyes, not because I failed him, but because I wouldn't bend. A week later, Felice posted a picture of herself at the same desk I would have occupied in D.C. She took my place, and in exchange, she signed what I wouldn't. Back in the present, I pulled a sealed folder from my coat and laid it flat on the table in front of him. He reached for it, but I didn't let go. "It's all in there," I said. "Falsified deductions, fabricated grant records, names, signatures, timestamps." His jaw clenched. "You were always the one who kept everything," he muttered, "always thinking 10 steps ahead." "I wasn't trying to protect you," I said. "I was protecting myself." He finally looked up at me. Really looked. "And now?" "Now it's not about protection. It's about clarity." I let the folder slide from my fingers and moved back. Footsteps clicked on the marble behind me. My mother, hair perfectly styled, makeup impeccable. Even now. She walked in like a diplomat caught in scandal, with just enough grace to pretend she wasn't scrambling beneath the surface. "No apology?" I asked. She didn't blink. "If you care at all about this family, you'll handle it quietly. You have the credentials. You have the respect. You could make this disappear before the end of the quarter." "That's what you think I am?" I said. "Some cleaner with a title?" "We gave you everything, Andolin," she snapped, voice sharp but measured. "The name, the education. You gave me a spotlight when it suited you," I cut in, "and shadows when it didn't." My father rose from the chair, slowly, as if standing might give him back the control he'd lost. "You're still one of us." "No," I said. "I'm what happens when your version of us fails." Silence again. I walked to the table, pushed the folder toward the center. "I won't destroy you, but I won't save you either." My mother's lip curled slightly. "You're really going to let us drown?" "I'm going to let the tide rise," I said. "Whatever it pulls in, or spares, isn't up to me." I turned to leave, then paused. "My name is clean," I added. "I'll notify the board that I recuse myself from any defense tied to blood relatives. That's all I owe." I walked through the hallway I once tiptoed through in ballet slippers, past portraits that never aged, even when we all did. I stopped briefly in the dining room. The table was still set for 10, like it had been in the old days. Silverware polished, cloth napkins crisp, the illusion still intact for whoever needed it. I picked up the glass at the head of the table, the same one he used the night he raised his toast and handed the legacy to Felice. I held it for a moment, raised it gently into the dim air. "To those who taught me what silence can become," I said softly. Then I set it down, turned, and walked away, my heels silent this time. The sun had dipped fully below the tree line when I stepped outside. The sky was bruised purple, and the first stars had begun to flicker. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The Capitol building was quiet when I arrived, but not for long. By the time we crossed into D.C., the sky had settled into that soft, golden hour glow, quiet and deceivingly still. My driver eased the car through a security gate, and the Capitol loomed ahead like a silent witness. I kept my folder in my lap, unopened, not because I needed to review anything, but because it reminded me who I was walking in as. They had tried to strip me of that, but today they would have to say it out loud. A young staffer met me just past the rotunda, walking briskly while adjusting her badge. She couldn't have been more than 25, probably fresh from law school or a Hill internship. "Judge Maris?" she greeted, slightly out of breath. "They're ready for you. This way." The hearing room wasn't what people imagined when they thought of power. No chandeliers or mahogany throne chairs, just rows of muted blue seating, a modest dais, and the slow whir of cameras quietly capturing every blink. The lights were deceptively gentle, just enough to make you forget you were being recorded by every major network. I scanned the room before taking my seat. Felice sat in the back, arms crossed, legs tucked tightly under the chair. Beside her, our father, his face harder to read than ever. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just stared like he was trying to control the weather. The panel chair, Senator Whitcomb, stood at the podium. He tapped the mic lightly, then turned toward me. "This panel," he began, "is now chaired by Judge Andolyn Maris, Federal Judicial Ethics Advisory Council." He stepped aside. I walked forward, calm but anchored. I'd been called many things in that house growing up. Too sensitive, too rigid, too black and white. But not once had they used my title. The room applauded politely. A few flashes went off. I noticed Felice shifting in her seat. My father's jaw ticked, just slightly. I took my seat at the center table. The gavel echoed once. Then I leaned toward the mic. "Thank you. Before we begin today's review of pending judiciary reforms, I want to speak to something more foundational than legislation." I paused, not for drama, but to gather my thoughts. Ethics isn't just about codes or clauses. It's about what you do when no one's watching, when it's quiet, when it's just you and the choice. Somewhere near the back, I saw a camera zoom in. I continued. My late mentor, Judge Harriet Morrison, once said, "The way we protect the powerless is the measure of our power, and today, that includes accountability among our own." Felice blinked hard, twice. I kept going. "I've reviewed the materials submitted regarding grant misallocations connected to charitable initiatives. Let me be clear, we will not politicize wrongdoing, but we will not bury it either." That was as close as I'd get to naming them. I didn't need to. The documents were already on record. The discussion moved on, reports, votes, recommendations. But I felt the air change when the investigative journalist from the Ledger was given the floor. She adjusted her earpiece, leaned into her mic, and spoke directly to the back row. "Mr. Maris," she said plainly, "is it true that Judge Maris raised ethical concerns about the Foundation's tax filings years before this investigation began?" Silence. My father turned his head slowly, as though dragging the words up from somewhere he didn't want to go. "Yes," he said finally. "Judge Maris did." No one moved, not even the cameras. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. That sentence was for them, not me. The vote was procedural after that. One by one, hands were raised across the dais. Unanimous. "Congratulations, Chairwoman Maris," Senator Whitcomb said, standing again. "It's an honor to serve alongside you." Outside the chamber, the flashbulbs were harsher. Reporters pressed in, calling out my name, my full name, not shortened, not mistaken. "Judge Maris, do you believe your appointment sends a message to families that silence is no longer protection? Chairwoman Maris, will you be recusing yourself from the charity-related litigation tied to your father's company?" I didn't answer any of them. I simply walked through the noise, straight to the car waiting at the curb. Inside, the air was cool, still. The door closed. The noise outside softened. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let out a long, slow breath. Then, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You've made your point. Come home. Let's talk." No punctuation, no name. I stared at it for a second, then turned the phone over, screen down. "Just drive," I told the driver. "Don't stop." Instead, I turned off my phone and told the driver to keep going. We drove through the night. At some point past midnight, I dozed off in the back seat, lulled by the hum of the highway and the unfamiliar feeling of peace. By the time I woke, the sky had softened to a pale pink and gold. The car rolled to a slow stop at the edge of a cliffside driveway. The air smelled of salt and pine. Mist curled over the tops of jagged rocks below. I stepped out barefoot, toes sinking into damp earth. The driver handed me the keys with a polite nod, then pulled away without a word. This place, this quiet cabin nestled above the Oregon shoreline, had no name on the mailbox, no one around for miles. And that was the point. I'd purchased it through a blind trust months ago, back when I still believed I'd need somewhere to escape after the fallout. I just hadn't expected I'd feel so weightless. Inside, the cabin was simple: wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, worn leather armchairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. I made coffee on a gas stove, carrying the mug out onto the deck where gulls screamed overhead and the wind tugged at my sweater. It had been 3 weeks since D.C., since they said my name, with respect. Since my father hesitated, then called me Judge Maris on live television, jaw clenched like the words hurt going down. Since Felice's fingers twitched every time I spoke, and my mother kept blinking like the cameras would disappear if she didn't look directly at them. I hadn't spoken to any of them since, and I didn't plan to. The world hadn't stayed silent, though. News trickled in, whether I wanted it or not. I didn't check news sites, but the headlines still found me. Folded newspapers left at local coffee shops, murmurs from the woman who managed groceries for the town. Maris Holdings faces federal investigation. Ethics Committee launches independent audit. Daughter rose as family fell. Apparently, someone had leaked internal documents. Not me. I hadn't needed to. The truth had its own legs. Felice had gone on a talk show, tried to defend herself. But the internet doesn't forget facial expressions, especially not the ones that twitch when someone lies. A side-by-side comparison of her statements against my panel testimony went viral. And then there were the emails. One came from my father. Subject line: "We need to speak." That was it. I didn't open it, just dragged it to trash. Then Felice. She tried to FaceTime me, at least 5 times in 2 days. I didn't even let the screen light up. I blocked her number. And my mother? She posted something vague on social media. A photo of a field of daisies with a caption about regret. Comments were disabled. Someone sent me a screenshot. I didn't bother reading it twice. I don't know what they expected. Applause? Forgiveness? Another chance to shape my name into whatever made them more comfortable? Instead, I journaled. Not to record every slight. I wasn't keeping a list of grievances. I wrote because it was mine. A soft, leather-bound book I'd bought the day I left court. On its first page, I'd written, "They didn't break me. They named me wrong, but I named myself." The fire crackled low as dusk approached. I added another log, watching embers glow and settle like breath. The smell reminded me of childhood camping trips, back when things were simpler, before ambition became blood sport. I stood and stretched. On the desk beside my journal sat a small white envelope. No stamp, no address, just a name written in my handwriting. To the family that taught me what not to become. I slid the journal shut, tucked the envelope inside a drawer lined with old maps and seashells. Not mailing it wasn't an act of cruelty, it was mercy. I didn't need them to read it. I needed to say it, to myself, then let it rest. I whispered mostly to the air, "This chapter ends with me." Outside, the sky flared orange and violet. I walked out onto the deck, pulled my sweater closer around my shoulders, and sat in the old wicker chair that creaked just a little when I settled in. The ocean crashed below in its endless rhythm. Waves don't ask permission to return. I watched as the final light dipped behind the horizon, colors melting into each other like a sigh. A soft breeze pushed against my collarbone, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like choice. And you know what? I chose it. Do you think silence can be louder than revenge?